Over the years, Capcom has made a number of notable remakes of the Resident Evil series, with their first remake of Resident Evil 1 starting all the way back in 2002, and their more recent series of remakes done on the RE engine starting in 2019 and 2020, and now 2023. And with the positive reception of the recent remakes of 2, 3, and 4, many are wondering what the next Resident Evil remake will be. And while there might be an obvious answer, there are a number of candidates in my opinion. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about what title in Resident Evil history I think is the most likely to get the next remake.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another, I mean the 156th. And as usual, I wanted to give a couple of disclaimers up front before we started the video. First of all, this is another one of my ramble videos, which means that I didn't script out the video, but that I have a number of notes that I'll be citing throughout. In addition, keep in mind that this video is strictly about my opinions and my thoughts about the future of the Resident Evil franchise. I have no insider information that will suggest one way or the other what will come next. These are just my thoughts on where I think the Resident Evil remake series is going next. Just keep in mind that this video is mostly just for fun. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about the next Resident Evil remake. So before I talk about what Resident Evil game I think is most likely to be remade next, let's talk about the potential candidates. First of all, we have Resident Evil 5, and I think a lot of people believe that this is the most likely to be the next Resident Evil remake. And I've seen a number of posts kind of joking about how, Capcom is a little nervous about remaking this game. I think a lot of people don't like Resident Evil 5 or think that people don't like Resident Evil 5, and so there's this sense of nervousness from the community of people who play Resident Evil games, but also from Capcom and the people who make them. That being said, I think that Capcom might do a great job remaking Resident Evil 5. I think they've shown that they really have a cool take on their older games and updating them and modernizing them for the modern day. I think that they could take Resident Evil 5 and make it more serious, make it more interesting, and really make it a fun game for modern, video game players. That being said, I think the original Resident Evil 5 also has a pretty good, dedicated fan base. I think people like this game more than others realize. Again, I've seen a number of posts basically talking about this game as if it's awful and, what will Capcom do to try and make this, a good game. And I think they just underestimate how much people like Resident Evil 5. I think people like Resident Evil 5 already and like it the way it is. I've actually seen a number of posts basically call it like a perfect Resident Evil game or a near perfect Resident Evil game. And I just think that that's really interesting. I think that people like it already, and so regardless of how good the remake will be, I think that there's a community of people who want that game and, like the original game. But that being said, let's pretend that the original Resident Evil 5 is terrible and that people really dislike it. I think that Capcom has shown they're good enough at remaking these games that they could make a game that is potentially bad, fantastic again, or, kind of, rejuvenate it for a new audience. And one other important detail about Resident Evil 5 when it comes to considering whether it'll be remade or not is Resident Evil 4. After I finished the Resident Evil 4 remake, in my opinion, Capcom really seems to be hinting that they are gonna be going for Resident Evil 5 next. I don't want to spoil too much about the Resident Evil 4 remake, but to me, it's pretty obvious that that's what they want to let players know. In addition, thanks to games like RE Versus, we're seeing high quality skins from Resident Evil 5 in the RE engine. So I still have my personal opinion on what I think the next remake will be, but there's no denying that Capcom seems to be hinting that they're going for Resident Evil 5 next. So that's what I think about Resident Evil 5 and whether or not it might be remade. The next potential remake is Code Veronica, and of course Code Veronica could be remade for a number of reasons. One being that this is kind of supposed to be the actual Resident Evil 3 instead of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It's intended to continue the story beyond the Raccoon City incident, and it's seen by many, and potentially, by the original developers, as the original continuation of the Resident Evil saga. So I feel like it does make sense to continue from 2 and 3 into Code Veronica, but especially 4, which I think would make a lot of sense. In addition to that, it's available only on the Dreamcast, really, along with, other hardware, but it's really tough to play this game. It's not as easy to play Code Veronica as it is to play Resident Evil 4, for example, right? I think there are a number of older Resident Evil games that are really easy to kind of play if you don't have the original hardware. And though I can play, Code Veronica on my PlayStation 4, I do think that it's still more difficult for people to have access to. And with that in mind, it's also one of the more dated titles in Resident Evil's catalog. It looks and plays very much so like an older game if you are able to access the original Code Veronica, and I think that Resident Evil and Capcom would be interested in updating that for a newer audience. This is one of the few games in the Resident Evil catalog that still, looks and plays in this kind of old fashion. And so with Resident Evil 4 Remade, I think that there might be a desire to have this game redone so that way it doesn't stand out. You know what I mean? It doesn't stand out as this game that's, left behind. I think that there is a desire when it comes to these Resident Evil remakes to have every single Resident Evil title somewhat playable, or at least the mainline games somewhat playable. And again, speaking of mainline games, I think that there would be a desire to make Code Veronica more of a mainline title, because it kind of is. Lastly, I believe that there was a Code Veronica fan game being made based on the assets from the Resident Evil remake games 2 and 3, and to my knowledge, they were given a cease and desist to stop working on the game. If I get any details on this wrong, I apologize, but that's the way I remember it being. Now, the thing is, fan games get shut down all the time, unfortunately. I've seen it happen with, Resident Evil, with Jurassic Park. Sometimes it just happens with no reason other than just, they decide that they don't want this to be done and they just found out about it. But that being said, it could also mean that they're potentially working on their own game and that they're concerned that this fan-made game might be potential competition for an upcoming game. Now again, it might not be the case, but that would be really interesting, and there is reason to potentially think that. So there are a number of reasons why Code Veronica could be the next game remade. Another possibility that we could see from Capcom is that they might want to revisit Resident Evil 0. The reasons for this one are a little bit more simple than my other reasons, and it's just that it's been a while since this game has been seen. There are a number of people who love this game, including myself, and it would look really great on the RE engine. It would be nice to revisit this game from a design perspective, but also from a graphical update perspective. I just think that it's been a while since we've seen this game visited, and again, it's not a game that's on the RE engine, so it does make sense for it to be updated in some way. Although I will say that I think Resident Evil 0 is probably the lowest on my list when it comes to what I think will come next in the remake series. However, if you ask me, I think that the most likely game to come next in the Resident Evil remake series is the original Resident Evil. And I know what you're thinking, there's already been a Resident Evil remake, so why would we want to see it again? Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, the original Resident Evil remake came out over 20 years ago, which is absolutely wild to think about. This game has been out for so long, and in my opinion, it still holds up to this day. I actually think that this game is fantastic, and it's my favorite Resident Evil game. That being said, it has been a while since we've seen the original Resident Evil revisited by the franchise, and so from just a numbers standpoint, from the amount of time that the game has kind of been left alone, it would be an interesting game to return to, especially with the new RE engine. And I think that's the next reason why I think it's very likely that this game could be made. While the original game totally still stands up and is completely playable and is fantastic, I do think that there might be a want from Capcom to have all of their recent games or all of their numbered games take place in this RE engine, to reimagine the first game in this engine that ties the other remakes together, and even the newer games together, 7 and 8. Plus, if you have the game remade on this new RE engine, you would definitely see a tremendous difference from the original game, the director's cut, the remake, and then this new remake. I don't think that the original remake and RE engine remake would be very similar. I think they would be almost entirely different, and I think that would be a really fun experience from a fan perspective, but also a gameplay perspective. I also think in general, when it comes to franchises, companies want to return to the original. They want an excuse to go back to the start and kind of relive that nostalgia, and I think this is a perfect opportunity. It makes sense without being super contrived. Again, yes, there's been a Resident Evil remake, but we haven't seen it like this, and it's a great way to update people on a game that they might not be as aware of as other Resident Evil titles. Again, I love the first Resident Evil remake. I think it's a fantastic game. I play it all the time, and I don't necessarily think it needs any improvements. That being said, I think with this RE engine, it could be an interesting game to revisit. I think it could feel like an entirely new experience, and I'm open to that. But more than anything else, I think there are a lot of reasons why Capcom would want to revisit it before any of the other Resident Evil titles. But anyway, those are just my thoughts on what we're getting next in the Resident Evil remake series. What do you think the next Resident Evil remake will be, and why do you think that is? And what do you think of my opinions? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Either way, I'm extremely excited for whatever Resident Evil remake comes next. I've loved every remake so far, and I only have optimism for the future as a result. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always going to make the videos that I want to make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. Over on Twitch, I typically play superhero games like Marvel's Avengers or Marvel Snap, with the occasional horror game like Resident Evil. So if any of that sounds interesting to you at all, make sure to check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/carrotscraps. And all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. The original Resident Evil remake came out over 20 years ago now, back in 2021. What the Over on Twitch, I typically play superhero games like Resident Evil. Oh, that's not a superhero game. Over on Twitch, I typically play superhero games like Pokemon Snap. Why can't I say the games that I want to play today?